Rebecca Hamilton stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the autumn leaves dance in the wind 30 stories below. At 38, she had built Hamilton Industries into a billion-dollar empire, but success felt hollow when measured against the one challenge money couldn't solve. Her daughter Emma, now 7 years old, had never taken a single step. The doctors had exhausted their explanations years ago. There was no medical reason Emma couldn't walk. Her legs were strong, her muscles developed, her nervous system intact, yet something deeper seemed to hold her back, as if an invisible weight kept her tethered to her wheelchair. Rebecca had tried everything. The finest specialists from Boston to Switzerland, experimental therapies that cost more than most people's homes, rehabilitation centers that promised miracles. Each attempt ended the same way, with Emma retreating further into herself and Rebecca feeling more helpless than any amount of business success could remedy. The breaking point had come 3 months ago, when Dr. Martinez, Emma's latest specialist, had delivered his gentle but devastating verdict. "Mrs. Hamilton," he'd said, his voice kind but firm, "sometimes the barriers we face aren't physical.
Emma is a bright, capable child who's been through more medical procedures than most adults.
Perhaps what she needs now isn't another doctor, but simply someone who believes in her without trying to fix her." That conversation had led Rebecca to make a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She would work from home, be present in Emma's daily life in ways her demanding schedule had never allowed. But Emma would still need care during Rebecca's business calls and meetings. The employment agency had sent several candidates, all with impressive credentials in childhood development and special needs care. But Emma had remained distant with each one, polite but unengaged, as if she'd learned to protect herself from the disappointment of another adult who saw her as a problem to be solved. Then came David Chen. At 35, the former Army medic carried himself with quiet confidence that spoke of someone who'd faced real challenges and emerged stronger. He'd lost his left leg below the knee during his second tour in Afghanistan, but the prosthetic hardly slowed him down. More importantly, he had an 8-year-old daughter of his own, Sophie, whom he was raising alone after his wife's death in a car accident 2 years earlier. "I'm not looking for another therapy situation for Emma," Rebecca had explained during their interview. "She's had enough of people trying to make her walk. I just need someone who can care for her, engage with her, treat her like the wonderful child she is." David had nodded thoughtfully. "My daughter Sophie had selective mutism after her mother died. Wouldn't speak to anyone outside our family for almost a year. I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for a child is simply meet them where they are, not where you think they should be." There had been something in his eyes when he spoke about his daughter, a combination of love and understanding that Rebecca recognized. It was the look of a parent who'd learned that loving a child sometimes meant accepting their limitations while never giving up hope. Emma's reaction to David was different from the start. Where she'd been withdrawn with previous caregivers, she was curious about this man who moved differently than others, who didn't seem to see her wheelchair as something that needed immediate attention. "That's a pretty cool set of wheels," he'd said on his first day, admiring Emma's custom purple wheelchair. "I bet it goes fast." Emma had smiled for the first time in weeks. "Want to see?" What followed was David's unique approach to caring for Emma. He didn't focus on what she couldn't do, but on everything she could. They painted masterpieces on canvases he'd set up at wheelchair height. They built elaborate blanket forts that accommodated her chair. They gardened together, David kneeling beside her as they planted flowers that would bloom next spring. Most importantly, he brought Sophie around for playdates. The two girls bonded over their shared understanding of being different, of carrying invisible wounds that adults kept trying to heal. "Sophie understands what it's like when everyone looks at you and sees what's wrong instead of what's right," David explained to Rebecca one afternoon as they watched the girls play. "They're good for each other." Rebecca found herself looking forward to coming home in ways she hadn't in years. The house felt alive again, filled with laughter and the sound of children being children. David had a way of creating joy that didn't depend on fixing anyone, but it was the small moments that really mattered. David never made a fuss about Emma's chair, but he also never acted as if walking wasn't possible. He'd stretch with her each morning, not as therapy but as part of their routine. the way some families said grace before meals. My physical therapist in the army used to say that the body remembers what the mind believes, he told Emma one day as they worked through gentle exercises. So we're going to keep believing in your strong legs even when they need time to remember too. Emma would giggle and flex her muscles, showing off her strength. With David, these moments felt like play rather than medical necessity. The breakthrough came on an October afternoon when the autumn leaves were at their peak. Rebecca was finishing a conference call when she heard unusual sounds from the backyard. Laughter mixed with something that sounded like cheering. She looked out her office window and saw something that made her heart stop. Emma was standing. Not just standing, but taking tentative steps toward Sophie, who was calling encouragement from across the yard. David knelt a few feet away, his arms outstretched, his face radiant with pride and joy. "Come on, Emma," she could hear him saying through the window. "You've got this, one step at a time." Emma took another step, then another. When she reached Sophie, both girls collapsed in a giggling heap on the grass, and David wrapped them both in a bear hug. Rebecca ran outside, tears streaming down her face. "Emma, sweetheart, you're walking." Emma looked up at her mother with shining eyes. "David said I could do it when I was ready. And today I felt ready." Over the following weeks, Emma's walking grew stronger and more confident. But what struck Rebecca most was how natural the progression felt. There were no dramatic therapy sessions or medical interventions. Just a child who'd finally found the safety and belief she needed to take the steps she'd always been capable of. "How did you know?" Rebecca asked David one evening as they watched Emma and Sophie race around the backyard. Emma's steps still a bit unsteady but filled with determination. David smiled, his eyes following the children. "I didn't know she'd walk, but I knew she was perfect exactly as she was. Sometimes when we stop trying so hard to fix what we think is broken, we discover it was never broken at all." As autumn deepened into winter, Rebecca realized that Emma wasn't the only one who'd been transformed. She found herself working shorter hours, prioritizing family dinners and bedtime stories over late-night business calls. The house felt like a home again, filled with the warmth of people who genuinely cared for each other. One December evening, as they all sat around the fireplace, Emma reading to Sophie, while David helped Rebecca prepare hot chocolate, Rebecca understood that they'd become something she'd never expected, a family. "David," she said quietly as they worked side by side in the kitchen, "I don't know how to thank you for what you've given Emma, what you've given us." David paused in his stirring, meeting her eyes. "Rebecca, you gave me and Sophie something too. You gave us a place where we belong, where Sophie can see that families come in all different shapes and love doesn't have to look like what we've lost." Emma's laughter drifted in from the living room, bright and free. In that sound, Rebecca heard everything she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not the miracle of her daughter's first steps, though that had been beautiful beyond words, but the deeper miracle of finding people who loved them not despite their struggles, but because of their complete, complicated, perfectly imperfect selves. Later that night, as Rebecca tucked Emma into bed, her daughter looked up with serious eyes. "Mama, do you think David and Sophie will stay with us?" Rebecca smoothed Emma's hair, thinking of the man downstairs who'd helped her daughter believe in herself, who'd brought laughter back to their home, who'd shown them both what it meant to be truly seen and accepted. "I hope so, sweetheart. I hope so very much." "Good," Emma said, settling into her pillow with a contented sigh, "because I love our family just the way it is now." And in the quiet of the evening, as snow began to fall outside Emma's window, Rebecca realized that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from trying to fix what seems broken, but from discovering that love, in all its forms, was never broken at all.